All right, mates, welcome back. J.L. Scott Fishing and Eats. Part 2 here. If you didn't catch Part 1, I'll link it in the description here. This is the nautical chart for the Potomac River Series breakdown. Okay, we're doing Part 1 is just D.C., okay? This is everything north of the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, otherwise known as the 495. And so this will show you the nautical side of it, so the depth of a lot of the areas that I covered in Part 1, which was just your map and your launch points and geographical area of different fishing spots. So make sure that you follow that. Check that video out. I'll kind of read over it just so as we go down here. But again, we start with the Arlington Memorial Bridge. Everything above that we really classify around here as kind of being the upper, even though most people can't think of it as Great Falls. Everything above Great Falls, Little Falls, Great Falls is the upper Potomac. Everything below is the lower Potomac. Becomes tidal, DC and below, with tidal influences, which is a bigger change compared to the upper Potomac. As I talked about before, the upper Potomac, everything in this area north of Arlington Memorial Bridge, we have Rock Creek that comes in at Georgetown, is predominantly smallmouth centric, and then secondary largemouth. Everything below DC and below is primarily largemouth centric, and you get some pockets of smallmouth, but by the time you leave DC, the DC jurisdiction, you tend to lose any smallmouth activity at all. It becomes pretty much 100%. Largemouth bass, hybrid bass, and a bunch of other species, but not smallmouth. So you can see here Arlington Memorial Bridge here, and you can kind of see what we're talking about. The 14th Street Bridge Complex I talked about, which is a popular fishing area. The Pentagon Lagoon is in here, another popular fishing area. You can see the depths here that we're talking about on these maps here. Gravely, there's a ramp at Gravely Point. And I talked about how a lot of people put in Leesylvania, places like that. Further downriver, Leesylvania is a ramp. Leesylvania State Park in Virginia, which is like the Woodbridge area, and people will make their runs up to DC. Like most of it is boater centric. Okay, there are some areas obviously where you do see a lot of kayak. Limited kayak area access areas, but a lot of kayakers in those areas. And plus you just have non-fishing kayaks that people just go out on the river and such, and you have to deal with those. So as we work our way down to what we primarily talked about, you are going to find that these areas offer in the early spring predominantly warmer water because of the warm water runoff from DC and Virginia into the Potomac. So it's not uncommon for there to be 5 to 7 degree differences. I think the other day the water temperatures were 58 degrees, whereas buddies that were fishing down in the Virginia creeks were in the 44 degrees. So there's your discrepancy or disparity, I should say, in why so many in the early spring people fish above the 495 Woodrow Wilson Bridge, okay, and the prime areas, but also because it begins to warm up, and then the bass start acting in a predictable manner in a lot of those areas. And you can see how long we're talking about here. In terms of these areas here on this side of it, one of the areas I talked about was right in here in 4 Mile Run, and known as 4 Mile Washington Sailing Marina, in and around there. It's just below Reagan International, or what we call National Airport. And you can kind of see here what we're talking about with just the varying depths of what you have. In this pocket is a lot shallower than obviously the channel and a lot of other parts of the Potomac, which is why it's become, it's becomes really, really popular. I'm going to open this up a little bit so you guys can kind of see a little bit more what we're talking about here. Anacostia River comes into Potomac right here, contains points up there. And you basically have Blue Plains, okay? So you've got that in their area. Sorry, mates, this is the Virginia side over here, okay? This is the Blue Plains wastewater treatment center, okay? Which is a very, very popular area, okay, to fish. And it kicks that warm water in to the Potomac. And so it's no different than your warm water lakes, right? Like, and how they react and change over and transitions are a lot different than, say, the cold lakes, right? You've seen that in Hot Side Lake Anna. People talk a lot about that, right? It's very, very similar in terms of fish will move into that warmer water, transition earlier in this part than below 495. Okay, and that's why it attracts a lot of people. Now, as I said before, there's very few boater tournament like national events and all of these things that come in February and March. They usually come late April, May, June, and then in August or early September. So they miss this transition, this staging transition of and this warm water influence. Now, some of the MLF guys and old FLW guys certainly come up to the DC areas in April and May as well, but it's really a lot more of an area of fall, late fall, and early spring, at least for me. You got Oxen Creek into here. This is a 295 bridges right here, right below Blue Plains. And you've got those areas that you can work. There's probably quite a few videos. They may not reference Blue Plains, but you'll be able to tell by that dock structure that that's where they're fishing in the channel, off of Blue Plains in the warmer water. You'll be able to see that if you just Google Potomac River fishing, I would imagine, because it is a very popular spot for people to hit as they're running and gunning these areas in these different pockets as they work their way up. They may start at the 495 area and work their way up into DC. Fox Ferry Point is another great area right in here. And you can just look at this area, what we got. Shallow water, 12 to 14. A lot of times there's also pockets of 18 to 22 feet, okay, that sporadically will pop up that you'll find, okay? You got Oxen Creek coming in here. You could see under 10 feet, 2 feet. See that, how that gets shallower. We're coming around here, Fox Ferry Point. Again, lot of hazards, okay? I've said this before in the first video. If you're new to boating in that DC area, and a lot of times I go as a co, I don't even feel comfortable. I would not personally feel comfortable running in some of these areas myself, just because of the hazards that exist. And so you don't really much have to worry about that if you're kayaking, if you're running a trolling motor or you're running a kayak skiff. It works great. Hoodoo Hero 130. You can drop a 7 horsepower, I think up to 10 horsepower, but run a 7 horsepower motor on the back of that kayak skiff, and there's no problem. Okay. But boating wise and things like that, a little further out in the channel, you want to definitely make sure that you've talked to people or done your research or talked to a guide, and because a lot of these hazards aren't marked. And here is your 495 bridge. So let's break down this area really quickly. As I said in the video before, the 495 bridge usually is the furthest north of most kayak tournaments, whether kayak bass fishing, for example, that comes to Potomac every year. And a lot of local events just follow the KBF rules, and they don't allow you to fish up in here, which is a shame, because they should open this up. They should at least move it all the way, to the 14th Street Bridge or something like that, in my opinion, because of the areas that you can fish if you're willing to make that run from your launch point, which could be a lot of guys are running these really great Torpedo Newport motors now on kayaks, and they don't mind. I've talked to anglers that do not mind running an hour and a half. They don't, I mean, think innovation keeps pushing it envelope forward. So that could be also the reason why, it's just a distance thing from the approved ramps and they just close it off. But 495 bridge right here, if you're fishing below, that is your boundary. You've got Hunting Creek, Cameron Run in here. You can kind of see how that's shallow water off of deep water, right? Off the channel areas, okay? Popular area, okay, on the Virginia side. But your primary points are going to be these two right here, okay? This area right here called the spoils, from Ferry Point down into this area, it is a very, very popular spot in the early spring, okay? And you can just, understand why, okay? People fish the bridge pylon. People fish all of this stuff. People stay to the right, move on up. Be careful. You want to idle through here for the most part, mates, okay? DC's got some restrictions further up. Woodrow Wilson Bridge is actually not the break between Virginia, Maryland, and DC. It's actually above the spoils, okay? So you can run your Virginia license, Maryland license in here without a DC permit and all the other permits required for DC. If you're not going to get a DC fishing permit, that's as far as you want to go, is in this area right here. So you won't be able to fish Blue Plains, the lagoons, 14th Street Bridge Complex, and those things further up. And so you've got spoils in through here. You can kind of see what we're talking about. The points, the various points off of the spoils plus back in the spoils. It's not uncommon for there to be literally dozens and dozens of boats, okay, and people fishing in this particular area, early April, okay. It's just a really, really common to see. And then below the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, you've got the National Harbor further down, and you've got Smoots Bay in this area, okay? And then obviously you got the National Harbors down through here. And you can kind of see the depths here, which is why these are 5, 6, 7 feet to shallow areas, right, off of these channels. And then you've got these areas that just, 6 to 8 feet of water, 12 feet, okay, up in through here, in and around the bridge. And then on this side, the Virginia side, you can just tell where you got channel, deeper water, 20, 25 feet, 26 feet, going all the way down, okay? And so what a lot of times happens is you find these bass in this area being in deeper water, usually 8 to 15 feet of water before in staging in their transition pre-spawn, before they make their way up. And what's always been kind of the experience over the years has been in this area, which is probably not that different than I think Mattawoman Creek and Powell's Creek and Potomac Creek and Nanjaboy, and those creeks further down the river. The males tend to move up depending on the weather. We've had a mild winter, but depending on the weather, the males will tend to move up, obviously first. And it really, differentiator based on the mild winter, in my opinion, is like that clock between the males moving up and then the females following. It can usually be 3 to 4 days sometimes. But with the mild winter, and in this particular area above, as you move further into DC in the warmer water, which could be approaching over 60-some degrees this week, that window is very closer from when the male bass move in shallow and the females follow, as opposed to further down in Mattawoman Creek and Nanjaboy Creek and places like that on the Maryland side. Pamunkey Creek's another creek example, where the males move in and they can be in there 2 to 3 days before really the female bass push from their transition or transition holding staging areas at the mouth of the creek, moving back up in when they want to spawn. So much of that, of course, is triggered by sustained water temps. This week coming up, we're going to have a one day 60 degrees, one day and maybe in the 70s, and then we're going to be back down to the 40s again. So we're not getting any sustainability in the aromatic temperature or even the barometric pressure or any of that to kind of like move the needle below 495 down river in terms of Virginia and Maryland and the creeks. Even though those creeks are going to warm up faster than the channel, obviously, without any warm water runoff influence because they're shallower water, we're still weeks and weeks away from really seeing that needle move to like above 50 degrees, 50 to 55 degrees in those things. It may be, if we don't see a warming trend, even though we've had this mild winter, it may be late April before we even get to that optimum like triggering point. And potentially maybe we're into early May, late April, May. Let's look at the lunar cycle, look at what the moon phases are going to be, which also come to play a lot of times with spawning in terms of bass. What's that going to look like when we get beyond the middle of April and the water temperatures are still hovering around 50 to 52 degrees? So keep an eye on it. As soon as we see that water temperatures climbing, then we know the game's up, right? We know what's going on. And those are your two biggest areas here, okay? So you've got that National Harbor. We talked about Oxen Cove, Oxen Creek coming into there, above, up towards the treatment plant, 295 bridge. We've talked about spoils, the spoils here. These are all well-known. Fox Ferry that, anyone you talk to is grew up in Virginia or Maryland is familiar with. And there's probably a lot of information you can Google out about specific areas. You really want to be targeting flat right now. It's March. You really want to be targeting the flats and drop-offs. As I mentioned before, highly effective presentations right now are the drop shot, Carolina rig, wacky, soft plastics as opposed to the shallower stuff because the bass just aren't really up there yet. If the temperatures do stay below 45 degrees in your areas and you're not fishing the warm water, you probably want to stay away from the spinnerbait and even away from the jerkbait. But if that jerkbait, right around that level, that jerkbait can be kind of effective. That bite kind of, when we fall below 42 and 40 degrees, that bite's not, that jerkbait's not really as effective. At least has been my experience in this area and around 495, but it does become a little bit more effective early in April when things begin to heat up because you've got a lot of the runs happening. You got a lot of shad moving. You got river herring moving. You've got a lot of, those things. Down here below Wilson Bridge, I had a mate ask me about the wildlife refuge. I'm sure it's going to show up here on the nautical map, but it is right down here. And there are two that I'll cover in the next section. Featherstone, which is further down, which is above Leesylvania, but below 495. And then you've got right in here, a wildlife refuge right in here at Bellhaven, which runs right in here. And then you've got the island here that is a popular area right in here. And, of course, that would be inbounds for anyone wanting to fish the kayak events below 495, as well as Cameron Run and some of this run here. If you really wanted to target like an A, B, and a C spot, working the bridge pilings, working in through here, and all that, those kinds of things. But again, it's a pretty. Think Susquehanna Flats. If you fished Upper Bay, it is a big area. So you definitely want to be trolling motor centric, kayak, skiff with some horsepower, or your trolling motor. You're going to be running if you're going to be planning on that. If you're not just going to fish, various coves and bays and just stay and targeting those. So it gets kind of tricky up in this area, especially for kayakers, boaters. It's not a problem other than the idling areas and the hazards. You can run and gun and make some good runs and long runs and hit a bunch of spots all the way up into DC. Kayaking, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit better. It's a little bit better further down to Leesylvania, Mason Neck, below, Mount Vernon below, to hit some areas, some really good areas, and back into some creeks, and do some, maybe some deeper water fishing, because what you're going to find in these areas, mates, and it's pretty much well known for us if you fish the Potomac a lot. You're going to have fishes in all three phases, okay, depending on where you are on the river. I mean, you're looking at, a big different fishery from this Woodrow Wilson Bridge 495 down to 301 in the south. It's almost like two different rivers and fisheries, okay? Temps are different, clarity's different, fish behave different. They just do. Again, just my experience. And so you could have fish in three different pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn, because you've got that warm water influence in the DC area and up that way. And then you've got a lot colder areas, and you've got shallower creeks that are going to warm up faster. On the Maryland side, you got the sun beating down on certain creeks longer during the day, right? Again, all of these things are going to factor into how you approach this section. So this section is just the DC that we've talked about in part one, breaking down. This is the 495 bridge right here. And really, I just discussed these areas other than right around here. And then the next part two, this is part 1A, okay, of the other video I did that had the map of this area, which showed all of the docks and ramps and piers and all that stuff you can kind of get your head around. Part two will start from here, from the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, and go all the way down to Northern Virginia, okay? And then part three, we'll take it from there all the way down to cover Mattawamma Creek. And then from there, we'll go from Mattawamma Creek all the way down to Nanjemoy Creek. So this breakdown series is going to break the river down into the sections that most of us during different times of the year are going to be targeting, okay? Obviously, now a lot of people are targeting this area that I highlighted today because we're still in that pre-spawn because of the water temps and all of that stuff. When we get into the spawn, you're going to find more people targeting that middle section and the creeks on both the Virginia side and the Maryland side, where it's shallow water, where they know the bass are going to be spawning and being close proximity to grass and all of that. So we're going to be sure to be covering that in each different breakdown session. Again, if you have any questions, you can find me on Facebook, JL Scott Fishing and Eats, and you can message me. If you need any links to the nautical charts, to the water temperatures, to the buoys, to anything pertaining to the Potomac River that's going to help you out, you want to make sure that you go ahead and look up Smallmouth Army. It's a newsletter. You can find that newsletter on the Facebook page or in the Facebook group, Smallmouth Army, or just message me and I'll send you the link. Basically, that newsletter just comes to your inbox every month, and we talk about a lot of different things in the region, fishing-wise, smallmouth-centric, but also we add in, obviously, the Potomac, the Tidal part of the Potomac as well. And you can get the links to all these different resources that you have at your disposal, that can just inform you some different things about this particular fishery. All right, mates.